Holy Gospel according to St. Luke, the 15th chapter. Now all the tax collectors and sinners were coming near to listen to Jesus. And the Pharisees and the scribes were grumbling and saying, "This fellow welcomes sinners and eats with them." So he told them this parable. There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, "Father, give me the share of the property that will belong to me." So he divided his property between them. A few days later, the younger son gathered all he had and traveled to a distant country, and there he squandered his property in dissolute living. When he had spent everything, a severe famine took place throughout that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed the pigs. He would gladly have filled himself with the pods that the pigs were eating, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, "How many of my father's hired hands have bread enough and to spare? But here I am dying of hunger. I will get up and go to my father, and I will say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands.' So he set off and went to his father. But while he was still far off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion, and he ran and put his arms around him, and he kissed him. Then the son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his slaves, 'Quickly, bring out a robe, the best one, and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet, and get the fatted calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' And they began to celebrate. Now, his elder son was in the field, and when he came and approached the house, he heard music and dancing. He called one of the slaves and asked what was going on. He replied, 'Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fatted calf because he got him back safe and sound.' Then he became angry and refused to go in. His father came out and began to plead with him. But he answered his father, 'Listen, for all these years I have been working like a slave for you, and I have never disobeyed your command. Yet you've never given me even a young goat so that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came back, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fatted calf for him.' Then the father said to him, 'Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice, because this brother of yours was dead and has come to life. He was lost and has been found.'" The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. Please be seated. When Jesus had some teaching to do and a point or two he wanted to make, he hardly ever started out by saying, "Let me give you a lecture." He a lot of times started out by saying, "Let me tell you a story." And 2 of those parables, those stories of Jesus, kind of top the charts in terms of best known, as in you don't even need to be a church person, you've probably heard of them. One of them being the one that's from Luke chapter 10, called the Good Samaritan. And then there's this one we just read from Luke 15, which is usually referred to as the parable of the prodigal son. Yes? Dictionary.com, prodigal. Wastefully or recklessly extravagant. You may have noticed Jesus didn't actually use the word prodigal. It's not a title he gave. It's a title tradition gave to the story later. But it's a title that kind of works, because this is absolutely the story of wasteful, reckless extravagance. The story starts at verse 11, but our text started back at verse 1 because that's where the context is found. And guess what? Once again, as is so often the case, context matters in Bible stories. The context is described in Luke 15:1, where it says, "Now all the tax collectors and sinners were coming near to listen to Jesus. And the Pharisees and the scribes were grumbling, saying, "This fellow welcomes sinners and eats with them." Now, Johnson County, Iowa, Iowa City, Iowa, this is a hotbed of culture. I'm sure there aren't many of you who, like me, know the title of a country song or two. But if you know any, about, I don't even know, a decade or so ago, Montgomery Gentry had a song called "I Come From a Long Line of Losers." The context of this parable is that the good religious people, that's the scribes and the Pharisees, they're grumbling because every time you turn around, there's a long line of losers with Jesus. And Jesus doesn't seem to mind that they're there. He almost seems to like that they're there. He almost seems to like them. I mean, it almost seems like he approves of them. That's the context. So Luke 15:3 says, so Jesus told them a parable, which he did, but actually, and by the way, the they is that long line of losers plus the uppity scribes and religious people. The they that he told these parables to, he actually told 3 parables. Bang, bang, bang. The prodigal son is the climax. So we skipped a few verses, but we'll go to the climax. Verse 11, Jesus says, there was a man who had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, "Father, give me the share of the property that will belong to me." How about we go from country to classic rock? This young man's favorite group was Queen, because his favorite song was, "I want it all, I want it all, I want it all, and I want it now." It might be a moment to pause in honor of unbelievably arrogant hubris, right? I mean, an inheritance is something you get when someone dies. And so essentially, this young man is saying by the tone, "Dad, I'm tired of sitting around here waiting for you to die. Give me what's mine." Oh, what's yours it is now, huh? Give me what's mine now. The father in the story, rather than doing what I think he should do, what? Disinherit the spoiled brat. The father does what he says. Verse 12, he divides his property between them. Verse 13, a few days later, the younger son gathered all he had and traveled to a distant country. And be assured that distant here is more than just being miles away from his dad. He distances himself from every blessed thing his father stood for. And there in that so far from dad place, verse 13 continues, he squandered his property in dissolute living. Dictionary.com, dissolute, indifferent to moral restraints, corrupt, immoral, loose. He's free, right? Indifferent to moral restraints. He's free to have the time of his life doing everything he's ever wanted, and everything he's ever wanted is everything. And so now he does everything that he ever wanted with every friend and every lover that money can buy. And it buys a lot. Turns out, though, that what seemed like so much money back on the farm isn't quite as much money in the big city where he's having all this, this big-time fun with all these beautiful people that, you know what, it costs money to keep big-time impressing and trying to fit in with. And so before long, the money's gone. And the friends are gone with it. Then it says there's a severe famine, which is Bible speak for an economic downturn. Which means that when for the first time in his life he decides to get a job and do some work, he finds out that nobody's hiring. Things get worse. His Porsche 911 Turbo is repossessed. The bank forecloses on his condo. He pawns his golf clubs. But the money doesn't last long, and he's got nothing, and it's desperate. he is now starving. Verse 15. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed the pigs. And he would gladly have fed on the pods that the pigs were eating, and no one gave him anything. This is called reaching the bottom, in case you don't recognize it. He's feeding pigs and developing a taste for pig food, which is even worse when you bear in mind that this is a story about a Jewish boy. And for Jews, pork and pigs are unclean, and unclean means they are insulting to other Jews. Unclean means you are insulting to God. Of course, reaching bottom isn't all bad, provided you survive it. Some don't. But it's not all bad. It can be a place where change happens. Verse 17. When he came to himself, he said, how many of my father's hired hands have bread enough and to spare? But here I am, dying of hunger. I will get up and I will go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands. So he set off and went to his father. Interesting. Totally selfish. He left his dad. Coming to himself, he returns to his dad. Selfish. Everything is about him, and he wants nothing to do with his father. Coming to himself, he realizes that he's got nothing without his father. Some of us have been on that same journey, of course. All the living we are doing until we came to ourselves and realized we had nothing without God the Father. Verse 20, he set off and went to his father, but while he was still far off, his father saw him. Now's where we learn something about Dad. He hadn't stopped his son from leaving. There are things you can't accomplish with chains. He hadn't chased him down and dragged him home when he left. Some things are so worth having, but they can't be forced. They can only be waited for. But waited for with the porch lights on, and the door unlocked, and prayers prayed, and eyes on the horizon. That is Dad. He doesn't do what he can't do, but he sure isn't going to miss the chance to do what he can do if he can. And so he's looking down the road. Every time he walks by the kitchen window, he's glancing down the road. Till one time he just refilled his cup of coffee, and he looked out there, and he recognized in the minute, he recognized the walk, he recognized that boy the minute he came over the rise on the other side of the drainage ditch, and filled with no, doesn't say that. Filled with no, doesn't say that. Filled with the thought that that boy had darn well better switch from walking to crawling before he gets much closer. Doesn't say that. Second half of verse 20. While he was still far off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. And he ran, very unseemly, he ran and put his arms around his boy, and he kissed him. My goodness, the boy had spent this time preparing this wonderful speech about how sorry he was, and it turns out he's welcomed home before he even has a chance to open his mouth and give his speech. Then he did start the speech that he'd work on. Verse 21, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Now, this wasn't the end of the speech. He meant to go on and say that part about, Dad, I can't be your son again. Could I just be one of your hired hands? But his dad doesn't even let him get to that part of the speech. In fact, his dad is so beside himself happy, he hasn't even heard that first part of the speech because his mind is racing ahead. Verse 22, the father said to his slaves, quickly, bring out a robe, the best one, and put it on, and put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet, and get the fatted calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this son of mine, notice that business about being one of your hired hands, that got no legs. This son of mine, Dad says, was dead and is alive again. He was lost and he's found. And they began to celebrate. They had a party. And the party's theme was grace. Grace which knows full well what the boy did. Grace isn't naive. Grace which knows full well what the boy deserves for what he did. Just that grace isn't interested right now in that boy getting what he deserves. Grace is just glad he's home. Verse 25. Now the man's elder son, that is to say the big brother, the firstborn, the responsible one, the good one, the scribe, the Pharisee, was in the field. He was being good. He was doing what he was supposed to do. And when he came and approached the house, he heard music and dancing, and he called one of the slaves and asked what was going on. And he replied, "Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fatted calf because he's got him back safe and sound." Then he became angry and refused to go in the house. Here's an all too common story. The very same grace that so welcomes the sinner brother who left home but has now returned, now so ticks off the older brother who has stayed home the whole time. In the history of good religious people, he's not the first, he's not the last to turn his back on his father because he just couldn't stand the idea of turning his face to his brother. But his father's back isn't turned to him. Verse 28, his father came out and began to plead with him. But he answered his father, "Listen, all these years I have been working like a slave for you. I have never disobeyed your command, yet you have never given me even a young goat so that I can celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came back, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fatted calf for him." This is interesting. The young brother leaves his father and comes back knowing he's got no right to anything. He should be a hired hand or even a slave. But here we find the older brother thinks that all these years with his father, he's been a slave. Wow, right? I mean, in a miles away, far off country where the younger son went, he made the choice to disobey. In the very near, but apparently nevertheless far off country where the older son lived, he had in his mind that he was stuck with obeying. The younger son was lost and rightly wondered if Dad would ever accept him after what he'd done. The older brother was in his own way just as lost, thinking that his father's love for him was only because of all he'd done. Verse 33, then the father said to him, "Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours." We had to celebrate and rejoice because this brother of yours was dead and has come back to life. He was lost and has been found. A moment ago, with venom in his voice, the older brother angrily referred to the prodigal as this son of yours who came back home. Now Dad, with pleading in his voice, calls the prodigal this brother of yours who came back to life. And that is the end of the story. Except, anybody can tell that's not the end of a story, right? Because how does it end? Does the family get together or not? Jesus doesn't say. And the reason he does, because he wants the ending to this story not to be something he says. Jesus' intent for this well-known parable is for the end of the story to be something we do. He ends the story when he does because the rest of the story is ours, the hearers, to do. But exactly what this story calls you to do depends on where it is that you've maybe perceived that in this story, where is it that in this story Jesus has been telling the story of you? Are you the younger son, feeling distant from God, far away, lost, wondering what in the world you'd been thinking when you did what you did? Then this story calls you to repentance, which involves turning, to return home, but to do so knowing this parable's promise. Oh my goodness, is there ever a welcome waiting for you when you get there? Or are you the older son? The responsible one, yes, but judgmental sometimes too. Judgmental when you think of grace welcoming those people. Are you, in other words, in any way, the one who is in your own way lost and far from Dad because of all the years you spent doing all the right things for all the wrong reasons? You know what? This parable calls you to repent, to return to the Father too, by returning to the realization that obedience is good. It's great. Doing what is right is good. But our place at the Father's table isn't about the level of our obedience. It's about the depth of the Father's love. Whether you're the younger brother or the older brother, in other words, we end this parable by returning to the Father and to love and to grace that is amazing, except that even that isn't quite the end. For having returned to the Father in this parable, we are then called to become the Father in this parable, not by trying to become God. There's way too much of that going on. But by becoming grace. We end this parable, in other words, by returning to the Father and then turning to our brother or our sister or our friend or our neighbor or our enemy or any sinner you happen to find, to say that there is grace, there is welcome, there is Jesus, there's a place at the Father's table for him or for her too. End of story. Amen.